Out of control spending like flying business class and racking up costly cell phone roaming charges. Senators' expenses are under the microscope in the new report by the Auditor General, and 9 senators have been referred to the RCMP. Some of those charges are exactly the same as those of Mike Duffy and Patrick Brazeau, who are on trial. Which brings us to our regular panel. Former RCMP officer Gary Clement joins us from Toronto, and here in the studio, criminal lawyer Solomon Friedman. So, first question to you, Gary. I know the RCMP have set up a special unit even before awaiting the Auditor General's report. You've done this before. What are they going to do when they get this report?
Well, Bob, the first thing they're going to have to do is they're going to have to look at it. And I would think the way they'll approach it, they'll take the most serious cases first, because I think what you've got to look at here is there's got to be a balanced and measured approach in looking at it from which ones are going to have the best likelihood of demonstrating criminal intent. Because it's not just good enough based on the Auditor General saying that we've got a bunch of senators that are out of control with the rules. We have to be able to demonstrate that they had knowledge and knew what they were doing was, akin to a criminal activity. So that's going to have to be demonstrated.
Now, Solomon, some of these issues that have been sent to the RCMP involve senators who bill taxpayers for golfing and fishing trips, for hockey tickets, for even a tailor. Their defense has been very similar to Mr. Duffy, which is, hey, rules are vague and Senate administration never said no. So how do the police go after them when we see the same kind of defense going up in the Duffy trial? It's the Senate's fault.
You know, and we need to distinguish, as a starting point between criminal intent on one hand and, fiscal irresponsibility or, a lack of care about how you're spending public funds on the other hand. The Auditor General's report doesn't deal with criminal intent, and it doesn't purport to. Of course, these files have been forwarded off to the RCMP for investigation. But, until now, what have we had? We've had 3 senators charged and 1, Pamela Wallin, under investigation. Now we're looking at 9 more potentially charged. And of course, nothing protects, by the way, the other group of 21 from being investigated and charged. And at a certain point, a judge who's sitting there and deciding, are you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of fraud, will take that into consideration. Was this just a common practice at the Senate? May have been wrong, may have been negligent, may have been poor management, but is that criminal intent to commit fraud? So
let me ask you about that. Does he make the point, is the RCMP going to say, look, is this fraud or not? And the other thing is, I know the RCMP are also looking at the other 21 senators' cases. The officers are reviewing that to see if, in fact, there might have been fraud involved here.
Bob, I think from an RCMP perspective, and we've really got to put this into perspective. I mean, we know the Auditor General has spent some $23 million so far in doing his audit for a total of probably less than $1 million in infractions. Now, I'm not, and I think everybody knows from my past discussions, I'm a strong believer that it doesn't matter the level of, if it's criminal, it should be looked at. But there does come a point of the law of diminishing returns where you've got to look at these and really look at some of them and say, is this just not a case that the policies and procedures were so vague and so out of control, there was no oversight, that it became a culture?
So, Solomon, one of the things we know is that 5 of the senators of the 9, the Auditor General believes that they committed fraud in terms of invalid housing expense claims, the very same thing that Mr. Duffy and Mr. Brazeau have been charged with. So, how does this play out? And does it help Duffy's case or hurt it?
Well, in my view, the Auditor General's report is really red meat for this trial, in the sense that there are very important points made by the Auditor General that actually appear to contradict the Crown's theory of the case. Number 1, the Auditor General says that in his view, political activities are well within the parliamentary business of a senator. In other words, there's nothing fraudulent whatsoever about using Senate money to go off and conduct partisan affairs. And number 2, we see that in that group of 21, those who the Auditor General did not feel warranted RCMP investigation, they had many of the travel expense irregularities that are being used as evidence of fraud in the Duffy trial. But what this will really come down to, once again, when it comes to the residents issue is another discussion about the difference between the constitutional definition of residence and some Senate policy, vague as it may have been, about what it means to be a primary resident for the purpose of claiming expenses. But I think this helps to muddy the waters. And in that regard, when the judge needs to be convinced to take away an individual's liberty, to brand them a criminal, use that stigma of the criminal code, Duffy can certainly use all the help he can get when it comes to reasonable doubt. And in my view, the Auditor General's report, it's not determinative, but it certainly is helpful along that path.
Okay, and Gary, these police investigations take a long time. What are we realistically looking at for any charges to be laid, if any, against some of these 9 senators?
Well, the fact that we still even haven't got a decision with respect to Pamela Wallin, I think is going to demonstrate that, this isn't going to be done in the short term. I would suggest what probably is going to happen, they're going to start them obviously and look through and see which ones should be prioritized. But they're also, and I can tell you, rather than having a plethora of resources tied up for length of time when you look at all the other priorities, they're also going to have to look at this and see how the Duffy trial unfolds in the end, because although I'm convinced they'll start these investigations, I don't think they're going to go at them like gangbusters. They really want to see how this unfolds with Senator Duffy's trial.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much.